Hello and welcome to what's essentially a bonus video, a director's cut, an extended, I don't know. It's a video meant to draw out a specific point from a previous message, a previous video in which I talked about hell. A couple Sundays back on July 18th, I talked about hell. It was week 3 in a series called Weapons and Balm. And it was really helpful and freeing for people to come to understand that hell as a word, and in large part as the concept most of us carry in our heads, it's actually not in the Bible. It's brought to the Bible and mapped onto other ideas, but it's not coming from the Bible like some of us were taught that it clearly did. So if you haven't listened to the message, or you didn't already know this, perhaps we're starting off pretty jarringly. So feel free to stop this and go listen to that message first. It'll probably be helpful if you do it in that order. What I wanted to spend more time on in this video, this content was really sort of relegated, the cut for time portion and the message before. This really serves as sort of a hang-up to some degree or another for people. This is the biggest, well, if that's true, then what about this kind of issue? And it comes from the Gospel of Luke, where Jesus talks about the rich man and Lazarus. It's Luke chapter 16, and in Luke chapter 16, Jesus says this. He says, "There was a rich man who was clothed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who desired to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Moreover, even the dogs came and licked his sores." It's a pathetic situation. Well, the poor man died and was carried by the angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried. And in Hades, being in torment, he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me and send Lazarus to dip the end of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in anguish in this flame." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that you in your lifetime received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner bad things. But now he's comforted here, and you are in anguish. And besides all this, between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able." They just can't do it. "And none may cross from there to us." And he said, "Well, then I beg you, Father, to send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he may warn them, lest they also come to this place of torment." But Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets. Let them hear them." And he said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, if someone resurrects, they will listen, they will repent." But he said to him, "If they don't hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead." And then that's it. That's the whole story. And this is the hang-up for a lot of us. For many people, this serves as the roadblock to much of what I talk about hell not being in the Bible. Because it seems like what Jesus is teaching is he's teaching about a real place with real people having real experiences, and that these are real warnings about this being where some real people, maybe people that we know, maybe you, could actually end up. And if you do, you will never escape. So I want to go through it. And hopefully you'll see when I'm done, Jesus is not threatening you and I with endless bodily torture, unless, of course, we become Christians. And not just any Christians, but, Christians who are right. So first, we can note at this point in the Gospel of Luke that Jesus has already been engaging with religious leaders who he deems to be wrong about just about everything pertaining to God or people or justice or the way the world works. He doesn't agree with them a lot in this section. The chapter before, Luke 15, Jesus told them parables like the parable of the lost coin, and then the parable of the lost sheep, then the parable of the man with 2 sons, which we came to call the parable of the prodigal son. And then in chapter 16, it goes right into the parable of the dishonest manager. Well, then the Pharisees that are present listening to all this, they mock Jesus a little bit because, as Luke puts it, they loved money. They loved power. So Jesus has a brief retort with them, and then he's suddenly talking about the rich man and Lazarus. This is how it's laid out. In the continuum of stories called parables that illuminate and challenge and rattle, comes this story about a rich man in Hades. But for some reason, people say, well, this one's not a parable. But there's no great reason to assume that the story of the lost sheep is a parable. The story of the dishonest manager is a parable. But this story is a documentary. This is reality. And maybe it's helpful to remember what Matthew points out. He says, all these things Jesus said to the crowds in parables. Indeed, he said nothing to the crowds without a parable. He never just says something plainly. He says it in a way that you're going to be talking about for millennia. So from the very outset, we should be listening to Jesus here in this passage, not with literal mindedness, but with an openness and curiosity to depth and insight about what else is being alluded to. What is Jesus getting at? So the parable starts with saying there's a rich man clothed in purple, fine linen, feasts sumptuously every day. He's rich. We're not told he was of bad character. We're just told he was rich and had it pretty easy. That's not a sin. Of course that's not a sin. We're not told that he was greedy or merciless or abusive. We're just told that it's a rich guy. But then there's a beggar named Lazarus, and that's all we're told about him too. We're not really told of his character, his faith, fruitful deeds. He's just broke and diseased, and there's dogs licking him, which aren't virtues. Of course those aren't virtues. Lots of people have tried to medicate their shame and sense of sin by selling all their stuff and living amongst the poor, and maybe that's done some good for them and the poor. But becoming poor doesn't make you a saint. Getting sick doesn't make you a saint. It just makes you poor and sick. Lazarus isn't described as being merciful or just or humble. He's just really bad off. But that's it. So none of us could make the case that the rich man or Lazarus are bad or good, or Christian or not Christian. They're just a rich guy living like a rich guy and a poor guy living like a poor guy. But then it says they died. And Lazarus was carried off to Abraham's side, or in older translations, it's rendered Abraham's bosom, his chest. Abraham's chest is where he's taken, it's the only time in the Bible that being placed in such a position, reclining on Abraham's chest is ever put forth as something that you'd strive for. Plus, it makes you wonder where all the millions of people who lived before Abraham, whose chest did they recline on? So, it says that Lazarus died and was carried, so it's not his soul, it's not a disembodied him, it's his dead body was carried, versus him floating or walking on his own volition. And it says the rich man died and he was buried, and that's bodily, we bury bodies. And we carry bodies. So the rich man is bodily in a place called Hades, and Lazarus is bodily Abraham's bosom. Hades is a Greek conception of the netherworld. And so Jesus is conjuring a word that's already, it's been in the Greek vocabulary for a long time, of this intermediary place managed by a god by the same name, Hades. He could hardly be teaching on hell or the Jewish conception of Gehenna when he talks about Hades. He's speaking in this pop culture vernacular of his day. One that I would argue is on the same level as when you and I tell a joke and we go, so this guy dies. And he gets to the pearly gates and he meets St. Peter. We set up a joke that way. We're not making a doctrinal statement. We're setting up a framework that's actually for a story about something else. But let's keep going. Because the rich man is bodily in Hades, in torment, and yells across a ditch, a chasm, a distance that's not too far to yell across and be understood. And he says, Father Abraham, have mercy on me. Have Lazarus dip his finger in some water for my tongue. I mean, imagine being roasted alive, and your concern is that you want to drink. And imagine being able to speak this request articulately. I mean, maybe later on you could try to microwave a potato for 5 minutes, take it out, hold it in your hand immediately, and try to say this: Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to go dip his finger in water to cool my tongue, for I am in anguish as I hold this potato. You're not going to be able to do it. And if you do it, your tongue will be the least of your concerns. See, I think there's a deeper point. Even in the current state of things, this rich man still thinks Lazarus is his servant. That's the only value this poor man could have. He's still trying to make poor old Lazarus something less than himself. The rich man is still at the center of his own narrative. So then Abraham says, apparently loud enough to be heard across this divide, but couldn't be so close that you'd have to suffer heat or have to, suffer smelling burning flesh and hair. He says back, child, which I think reinforces that the rich man who calls Abraham father, he's Jewish. So this isn't just any wealthy man, he's a wealthy Jewish man, or a wealthy man associated with the Jews, which is very interesting. Abraham says, child, Remember, in your life, you enjoyed good things and Lazarus bad things, but now Lazarus has comfort and you get anguish. So understand, that isn't in keeping with Christian doctrine at all. That's a totally different kind of religion. We don't believe that the reason some people get to go to whatever version of paradise it turns out to be true is due to their financial or physical health. Nor do we believe that what damns us is enjoying things now. This is a completely foreign doctrine, which shouldn't be disturbing at all when we understand, well, Jesus isn't teaching doctrine. Then he says, Abraham says, besides all this, between us and you, a great chasm has been fixed, in order that those who would pass from here to you may not be able, and none can cross from there to us, which I'm telling you makes sense by half. Because I get that the divide would be there to keep the people in the punishment realm of Hades secure. Prisons have, walls and barbed wire fences for the same reason, to keep them in. But why would it need this chasm? Why would it need to be there to keep people in paradise from going to the Hades side? Why would that be necessary? Is Jesus teaching that there's these rascals trying to sneak into Hades in the afterlife? To, I guess, see the suffering up close? Like, how did they get to paradise if they're that cruel that's why they would want to go? Or maybe they're going because they want to try to help the suffering. Well, that means they're more merciful than God. Because God's the person, allegedly, that created these two places with the great divide between. See, this doesn't make sense doctrinally, if Jesus is describing reality. But it's perfectly fine in the context of Jesus' teaching, as he so often did, the great reversal of fortunes. He does it all the time. He says the last shall be first, the kingdom belongs to children, the least shall be greatest, the foolish shall shame the wise, the mustard seed, small little seed, becomes the biggest tree. Blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek, blessed are the mourning, because it's going to turn around for them. He's always doing this great reversal of fortunes, this kingdom that's sort of upside down and on its head. Jesus is painting a picture of how things will be made right with the rhetoric of opposites. It's hope for those who need hope. It's confrontation for those too afraid to do the confronting. Then Jesus says, the rich man, finding out this isn't going to work, he goes to plan B. And he says, and frankly, if you're holding that potato later in your blistered hand, try to get this sentence out too. And then also try to care about what the rich man seems to care about as he's roasting head to toe, far more than your potato. Ready? Because he says, then I beg you, here's plan B, I beg you, Father Abraham, then send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, so that he can warn them so they don't also come here. Now think about it. For a man so awful that he's consigned to eternal anguish, it's pretty incredible that his thoughts in this moment of suffering are about the welfare of his family, his brothers. I mean, many people teach hell, that the damned are so overcome by their wickedness in hell that they scream and they wail and they gnash their teeth, sure, but they do delight at least in other people's suffering too. Misery loves company. That's what evil people want, But this rich man, he's trying to figure out, while roasting head to toe, how to make sure his brothers are going to be okay. And Jesus has Abraham reply, they have Moses and the prophets. Let them listen to Moses and the prophets. And he said, no, Father Abraham, if somebody resurrects, they'll repent. No, if they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they're not going to be convinced, even if somebody rises from the dead, even if they see a resurrection. So here's something interesting. He says, they've got Moses and the prophets. Moses and the prophets means the Bible for a Jew in Jesus' day. That's what it meant to his audience. That's what it meant for Jesus. Moses and the prophets is the Bible that they had. Nowhere in the Bible, especially there, is there a single passage, a single word about the afterlife, Abraham's bosom, heaven, Hades, hell, a great chasm, not a syllable about bodily anguish. It is not there. So Abraham is saying that all the rich man's brothers need to do is know what's in the Bible, which doesn't mention the torture the rich man is suffering. But the Bible does take great pains to describe injustice and oppression and tyranny and the corruption of power and money, how it makes otherwise good men become a terror to those that they lead. The Jewish scriptures are packed full of laws and stories and wisdom about how to treat the poor, how to help those in need, how God wants mercy, not the sacrificial system or the temple institution. It's full of commands about how they were to welcome the stranger at their gates, to love their neighbor as one loves themselves, to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk in humility with the divine. It's all over the place. And then Abraham, he adds that even someone returning from the dead isn't going to convince them anyway. A resurrection isn't going to change anybody's mind, which is an amazing confrontation with those who later would see the resurrected Christ, perhaps even start going to church every Sunday, and still ignore the beggar at their gate. Even shame the beggar as lazy, just looking for handouts. If you just worked harder, if you just had more faith, or maybe the only thing they're worthy, that makes them worthy, is being put into service. So interestingly, the high priest in this moment that Jesus is telling this story is a man named Caiaphas. Caiaphas is a Sadducean high priest. And remember, Sadducees, they don't believe in the resurrection. In John chapter 11, Jesus has resurrected his friend Lazarus. You remember, Jesus wept in that whole story. This guy's name is Lazarus. Well, Caiaphas, who probably didn't believe the stories circulating about Jesus, but he did believe that in the threat to himself that was Jesus' growing popularity, after he resurrects Lazarus, he initiates this plot to kill Jesus. He's gotten the idea that Jesus dying might help actually bring all the scattered Jews back together all over the empire, versus Jesus becoming so popular that it causes the already precarious arrangement with Israel that Israel had with Rome, it could disintegrate into more chaos. So this Caiaphas, this high priest, was not universally respected, but was very well known. Not universally loved, but very well known. And high priests were supposed to become high priests, by the way, by succession as Jews, but Caiaphas had been installed by Rome. This was a new thing. The empire had meddled and taken over this sacred and cherished process so that the guy that Rome wanted in the seat was put into that seat so that it could help them control the Jews. So many Jews, sure, they feared his power, but they held a little bit of contempt for him, many of them. So this is a powerful, famous or infamous man, this high priest, serving as a conduit between the people and God, but was really sort of planted there by Rome. So consider the context Jesus is speaking in politically. He's surrounded by influential, even hopeful religious leaders and Jews oppressed on every side by men in power. And into this world Jesus speaks. Caiaphas is the resurrection-denying, gate-locking, very, very rich man who is directly tied to the death and raising of a man named Lazarus. Caiaphas wore purple, the most expensive kind of clothing you can get, because you get the purple color, the dye, from a sea snail. It's very hard to come by. Caiaphas ate really well. Caiaphas is the one that had the big feasts. Caiaphas is a household name for Jews who hated him or loved him. He was not at all like Jesus. He was not at all what God had called his people to be. And Caiaphas had, count them, 5 brothers: Eleazar, Jonathan, Theophilus, Matthias, and Ananus. And that last brother, judging by his name, was even worse than Caiaphas. My friends, Jesus isn't threatening you and I with hell. In the context of other scandalous parables about what God is actually like, how love actually works, how bent on including and loving God actually is towards those that religion says, no, you're out. Jesus is then being extremely politically subversive and telling a story that calls out the corruption and inequality of those in power. In the context of religious leaders pushing back on Jesus, but doing so because, as Luke says, they love money, they love power. They benefit from a corrupt status quo. In that context, Jesus says in a very memorable, very scandalous way, all right, so there's this guy living the good life while our friends beg at the gate. This guy runs things, but our friends are just doing awfully. Well, he and the poor they both die. And when they do, all the things that seemed important and right to the power-hungry, corrupted rich guy proves to not have been the point at all. He gets rather desperate at that point because he should have known better. But God, as usual, takes sides, and he takes sides with those deprived of their power and their voice and their dignity. And that's not new, guys. Moses and the prophets have been saying the same thing all along. The rich man should have known better. In fact, he does, and so do you. That's what the story is about. I mean, I hope this helps us understand that this isn't Jesus teaching about hell after we die, as much as it's the creativity of the Spirit of Christ confronting the hell we create now, the hell we create for ourselves and others when we make our own comfort and our own priorities and our own rank top priority, even at the expense of our human siblings all around us on the other side of our gates. Jesus wants to save us from all that, from this inhuman way of being. And Jesus does save. But it's hard for the rich to enter into this saving way. In fact, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle. It's not impossible, but it's hard, and it's very uncomfortable, and it's going to take a while. So here's to letting go of horrifying threats about the afterlife and instead understanding that Jesus is, as the Spirit always has, is reminding us to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly every day with the divine. I hope that helps.